Okay, we, as the PCDC of Lyons, Colorado, do not have a quorum for tonight's meeting, so we will not hold a public hearing. We will move instead to our public workshop. And there you got it. Thanks for your patience, Maria and Cassidy.
Yeah, and sorry, we were just waiting to see if we could get a few more people coming in, but we're only at 3, so we don't have 4 as a quorum. So Cassidy, can you hear me?
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, I can hear you.
I'm certainly glad you didn't stay until this to go, so. right.
Okay, did you still want me to do the presentation? Yes.
Yeah, we're gonna move into the workshop and we'll at least get some direction from PCDC about how to move forward, so.
Okay, let's see if I can share. Okay, I can screen share if that works.
Sounds great.
Okay. Have a good workshop, guys.
Thank you, Maria.
Glad you get to it all.
I'm gonna sit over here too, if that's all right.
Cash. Can you guys see that?
Yeah, and to frame this up, so kind of as discussed, we're gonna start going through the comprehensive plan chapter by chapter. Tonight's just gonna be kind of going over chapter 1 and what's in the plan. And then the goal out of tonight's meeting is to get the PCDC's direction, kind of how you all want to move forward with updates, and how we want to handle that. So on the planning staff side, what we will do, we didn't for this chapter, of course, there's not really any check marks to check, or boxes to check, but for each chapter, we'll do this once a month. Unless there's just a lot going on hearing wise, but we'll do it once a month. And planning staff prior to that, we will go through all of the strategies and goals, and we will see what we have accomplished or what we as planners think we can accomplish, and then seek that direction from you all. And with that, I'll let Cassidy take it away.
Okay, just to double check, can everyone, is my screen being shared properly?
We can see your PowerPoint deck and all the slides on the side. So you're not in presentation.
Yep. Is that better? Okay. So just to start, I think everyone's seen the comprehensive plan. But it starts with a little introductory chapter that goes over some history. It has a dedication to Laverne Johnson. And just a little bit more general information about Lyons as a town. And this slide just kind of highlights some of the goals and topics that are in the plan, which you can see in the little bottom corner was adopted in January of 2023. So that includes things like land use, historic preservation, character, tourism, and kind of everything in between. And the plan is meant for the Lyons planning area, which includes all of incorporated Lyons, as well as sub areas in the north, south, and east St. Vrain. And then unincorporated Boulder County that's adjacent to the town, which would be things or land that could be incorporated in the future. So that's kind of everything that the plan is supposed to cover, not just currently the town of Lyons. And the process and the timeline, this is just all of chapter 1. So some of this is less important, but just the process of how it was created. It took 2 years. You can see 2021 to 2023. There was online engagement, which included responses from 542 respondents, and that was community surveys, opportunities to interact with maps, and a bunch of different opportunities. And then there were also community meetings that had over 100 participants. So just sprinkled throughout, there was a lot of stakeholder engagement opportunities. And so just kind of moving on, the comprehensive plan also takes into account a ton of other studies. It's not just a standalone document. And you can see this whole list here: parking studies, sustainability studies, pretty much everything in between, stormwater master plan. And there are 2 pages that list all the plans and studies that were looked at when creating the comprehensive plan. So chapter 1 just focuses on major trends and key issues. And so this is just kind of a few of them. And it just kind of gives a little overview of what residents were concerned about at the time. So the first one is changing demographics. The population under the age of 19 grew or was growing. There was a stable and sizable senior community. And so there were some thoughts for needs like daycare, senior facilities, and healthcare for different populations. There was also a decrease in lower income populations and a rise in housing prices and a lack of housing options that made it difficult to attract economically diverse populations. Lack of affordability was another key issue or trend. The housing market was more expensive since the loss of the flood. There was a nationwide housing crisis, limited geography in Lyons, and a high desirability. Also, after COVID and through COVID, the possibility of remote workers coming to town and wanting to live there grew. And so if that trend continues, it would strain the ability for local businesses to attract workers and become harder for residents on a fixed income to stay in Lyons or to move to Lyons. And so the next was the defining parameters for future growth. A lot of participants, residents, recognize Lyons, the character, the small town feel, scenic views, access to parks, open space, and trails. So that's very important and highlighted throughout a lot of the goals in the comprehensive plan. And so is the need for development, but also the concern for where. So the comprehensive plan does say that a mix of greenfield and infill or redevelopment will be needed to help accomplish goals. Another issue was the hazard mitigation and resilience. Resilience improved after the flood, but there was definitely a concern for another large-scale flood and the impacts that it would have. Additionally, Lyons is at risk for wildfires, and so it was very important that resilience to wildfire be highlighted as well in the comprehensive plan. And then the other one was ability to leverage available resources. It was very much highlighted that Lyons residents are very involved and dedicated to the town. And so it was discussed, how can we make these efforts sustainable over the long term, not just for like an individual project, but all around. How can these boards, commissions, volunteers, and everything in between continue to help the town? And then enhancing local and regional connections. I think it's been talked about before, but municipalities and Boulder County are working together. And so that was highlighted in the comprehensive plan. And so just kind of going over the parts of the plan. Chapter 1 is what I just very briefly went over. That's the overview of Lyons and the overview of the big goals. Chapter 2 is the guiding principles, goals, and policies. That describes what residents of Lyons value in the community they want to see in the future. It provides, or it should provide, guidance for day-to-day decision-making and other actions taken by the Board of Trustees, the PCDC, town staff, any boards and commissions, essentially to advance the goals of the plan. Chapter 3, which is the future land use and 3 Mile Plan, provides guidance on how and where different types of development and land uses will be allowed in the town, and establishes policies to guide future annexations within the 3 Mile Plan. And Chapter 4 discusses actions that need to be taken to achieve goals and leverage available resources. And then I did want to highlight there are quite a few appendices, and they actually have some good information, community profiles, survey summaries, policy scans, and lots of actually useful information. And just to kind of boil it down, a lot of chapter 2 looks like what you see under chapter 2 on at least my left. It says goals and policies, and then it's got a little policy in bold, a goal, and then kind of what the action might be. So policy PR 1.4, revenue generation, continue to seek opportunities to collect revenue through visitor use of town of Lions facilities. Essentially chapter 2 is kind of laid out like this. So this is the Parks and Rec section. There's a historic preservation section, an education section, and then on and on as you work your way through all of the goals. So it's laid out, so it's kind of easy to read, easy to scan. And then the blue information has sometimes information about partners, commissions. In this case, it's a little bit of information about Dr. Bob Properties. So chapter 2 is pretty easy to skim. Chapter 3 is a little less easy to skim, but generally still pretty readable. It's got the nice information. You've got, in this case, it's information about the North St. Vrain. And this is just one page of the plan, but it talks about natural hazard sensitive lands. Sometimes it talks about potential for annexation, and kind of what the vision is for different areas of town. So chapter 3 looks a little bit different than chapter 2. And chapter 4 looks very much just like this sheet here. It has a goal which most align to the chapter 2 goals and policies. And then it has a lead and partners listed in priorities. So you can see support the Lions Redstone Museum as its own entity, lead is staff, and then lots of partners on that one. So again, chapter 4 is really easy to skim and just kind of check for what you're looking for and then continue on your way or focus in on a goal that you're hoping to work on. And so this is kind of how it was organized, the guiding principles, the elements, goals, and policies. That is just the whole framework of the comprehensive plan. And going back, you can see the goals and the guiding principles, goals, and policies is on the top. And there are 5 of those. So plan monitoring and updates. Its progress on the strategies are supposed to be reviewed annually, and a status report regarding near-term strategies should be provided by town departments, boards, commissions, in the town's annual report. And then plan amendments should be reviewed and updated every 2 to 3 years, with major updates evaluated every 10 years. So yeah, that's chapter 1 in a nutshell, with kind of an intro into what you might see if you keep reading and going a bit further into the plan. Yeah, so if you have questions, I can answer them. I'll stop, or I guess I'll wait to stop screen sharing, just in case someone needs to or wants to refer back to another slide.
Thank you, Cassidy. Does anyone have a question specifically about what Cassidy presented before we kind of just chat about how to tackle this thing?
Sorry.
All right, we can always circle back. At our agenda setting meeting, you know, we've had it on our to-do list to say, okay, we need to be better stewards of the comp plan going forward, right? So how do we do that? And Andrew and I met. We didn't come up with any creative ways to do it because it's kind of complicated. There's chapter 2, which outlines the goals, and then the actual guesses at implementation policies don't happen until chapter 4. And there's a bunch of other stuff kind of sprinkled around in narratives. And so it's not as simple as saying like, okay, we've had a lot of interest in discussions around housing and strategies to do affordable housing. Let's update our comp plan so it reflects our current thinking. Well, that's like a pretty comprehensive review of the plan, like hundreds of pages, where somebody would have to go through and try to find like any kind of conflicting information potentially with something we want to update it with. So anyway, long story short, I don't really think we have a good idea for how the PCDC can maintain this thing going forward. So that might really just be what we start talking about today. And then specifically chapter 1, probably not a lot we need to update, but I have a couple ideas if and when we want to get there. So I don't need to talk the whole time, but I'm kind of curious. Paul, you're obviously familiar with it. Debbie, you were around when we did it. Like, based on how you understand the structure of the comp plan, like, is there kind of a no-duh systematic way that might come up of how we can start to address this?
Address possible conflicts with possible
Updates.
updates, okay.
Yeah. I mean, actually,
Inconsistencies are,
Cassie, that second to last slide you had, that was the comp plan's direction towards updating itself. Do you mind sharing that again? I'm sorry.
The triangle?
Let's see.
No.
No,
I'm
it's
trying.
annual reporting is every year, but yeah, she'll bring it up.
And I have an idea if you want to hear it.
Yeah, please.
So I think our,
Cassie, make it bigger, there it is, yeah, thanks. Okay.
I would say that, our values and priorities probably haven't changed. Our goals might evolve over time. So you might, I mean, and that's making an assumption that PCDC might totally decide differently about values and priorities. But, you might start with thinking about it in a top-down approach and looking at goals.
Yep.
And then saying, okay, do we still think that this is the right goal? Does it need to evolve in some way? The other thing that I think might be useful moving forward is thinking about prioritizing goals, what your suggestions for that might be, because I think some of the confusion with the comp plan, and I think it's a really solid comp plan.
Yeah.
That represents, gosh, so much work. But I think it's the challenge for the whole community might be in part going, okay, what do we prioritize? What is the most important thing to tackle first?
Yeah, and I think I made that point some time ago is really trying to decide what's actionable, what we're trying to achieve, in the short term. And there's some mention of kind of what that looks like. And then, there are some goals in here that are much more broad and long-term and perhaps even more aspirational, or things that we're aspiring to, but in daily implementation might not be the most popular idea. We've seen that come up a few times.
One of the pitfalls I see in this, sorry to interrupt.
No, you're good.
One of the pitfalls I see in this is, the planning commission is kind of charged with shepherding this thing through, right? But it's not a planning document per
Yeah.
se. It's like kind of a community values document.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be. That's just how we did it with our consultant, because they wanted it to be kind of a big celebratory rally around thing for our community. And I think it did that. And it is a beautiful document. If you just sit down and read it, it's like pretty concise, but it's hard to use.
Yeah.
It's hard for PCDC to use it. When there's a public hearing, it's hard for us to know kind of where to go in the document to support something that's being brought to us. Like last week, when we were talking about the 5-acre rule, like I think I would have to sit down and spend a couple of hours every time there's a public hearing to kind of understand how the comp plan could be applied to what we're doing. So I agree with you that I don't think we shake and move and change the values and priorities. And so I almost wonder, building off of what Mayor Rogan says, maybe we systematically go through the chunks of the goals instead of going through the chapters one by one.
Yeah.
Like, we're not going through chapter 2 in one meeting. That would take a while.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think breaking chapter 2 up with each guiding principle, kind of taking a meeting. And some of those guiding principles aren't very planning based. So those might be, some of the tourism stuff, and we can speak to, but
That's kind of what I forgot to mention earlier is we shouldn't be the only ones reviewing this
Sure.
prioritization.
yeah.
No, it seems to me that it would make sense for the PCDC to review planning related content and, for example, the EBC to review tourism. That would be kind of vitality. So maybe sharing the load a little bit among the commissions.
And that would be, I would assume the board of trustees would support that kind of thing, of the PCDC kind of taking the lead on asking other commissions to review parts of the content. Delegating.
Well, we'd have to talk about it as a board, but, yeah, we can totally do that. And, maybe in lieu of having the farmer's market first reading on the next meeting, maybe, Andrew, if that's something you want to bring forward as a discussion direction item. For
the board of trustees.
Yeah.
You had knocked off one of my spots. I'm kidding. No, I can.
We can keep.
No, that's totally
You don't
fine.
need to do that.
No, I can do that. That's no
You
problem.
don't wanna stay till 11:30?
I mean, it's a little presumptuous for us to say, oh, PCDC is gonna delegate to all the other commissions, right? We're not the leader commission, so I think the board of trustees would be nice if they.
Yeah, well, direction to boards and commissions comes from the board, so.
Correct.
Cassidy, could you go back to the slide with the pyramid on it? Please. So, we're talking about values and those probably won't change. And if any of you have gone through like strategic planning process, sounds like you all have if you're interested in this. A lot of times people keep something like this where everyone can see it all the time. So anytime is trying to discuss something and trying to change something, you just point to, well, look at that. That's our guy right there. Always stick to this.
There is supposed to be, I don't know right now, but I did ask Victoria there when we were having the public hearing for the Riverbend property, that there is supposed to be a copy of the comprehensive plan always here in the back.
Yeah,
There was, and I don't know what happened.
Yeah,
because I haven't read it in a year and I need to refamiliarize myself with
Yeah.
what are our guiding principles. I'm not actually sure. Like I have some ideas, but I need to refresh.
yeah.
But like as it pertains to goals, and maybe this is in our comp plan, like I was writing down questions, in every organization, a key question is how much should we grow? And what does growth mean? Is it growing our revenue? Is it growing our population? And it's like, okay, what kind of constraints do we have on growth? What is our goal? What is the right number? How do we determine that? Like what limits that number? When do we know if we've grown too much in which areas? And so does our comp plan go through those types of goals? Like we're limited by water, or we're limited by land, or whatever is limiting to us, or we're limited by our values. We only want to grow to X.
They're not measurable goals, which was.
They're not
the point of-
measurable goals.
Which is the point of contention.
We
during
need
the-
measurable goals. That's
Yeah,
just my
that-
opinion, but.
Well, that's what the implementation strategies kind of are measurable checklist items, but sorry. Go ahead.
It's hard to know who you want to be, like where you're going if you don't know who you want to be.
Yeah.
Well, I think the document does really good about who we want to be. It's quantifiable metrics to get to where we want to be was not as teased out. And I think that was probably on purpose, but,
Mhm.
so now as we go through and we decide how to implement these things, I think maybe that's where we can start introducing, okay, what are the quantifiable characteristics that we can track? And then who is gonna track those and what does that mean?
And I think I think you're right, Andrew, it was on purpose. And one of the reasons is that because this is a guiding document that's supposed to last 10 years at least. A lot can change in the span of 10 years. And so I think the thought was to leave flexibility and room for that, which isn't helpful when you want to measure against something and totally get it.
Like we have our affordable housing goals, that's
Yeah.
something measurable, that's good to
Yeah.
work with.
Mhm.
It's just like, are we growing because our town needs more revenue, because we need to build another school? Like why do we need to grow and in which areas? And how do we know if we're succeeding?
There's not a lot of talk of growth in the plan. There's a lot of talk of preservation.
Yeah,
Preservation?
yeah, because people want to preserve the small town feel, prefer.
Every sentence was like scrutinized during the review of this thing.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
nothing that like is overly decisive in any way.
It appeals to a lot of people then. But when you
Yeah.
say small town, that's why I was thinking about growth immediately, because we cherish our small town. What is small? Is it 2,400? Is it 3,500? When does it stop being small?
Smaller than Boulder.
Smaller than Boulder. Okay.
And then you brought up the the limited geography, or
Right.
Yeah.
unlimited, but simply by the
So-
available land.
There's a
Let's
question,
grow up.
Yeah, and then exactly, yeah, and then ours, yeah,
there's a question of how to update
yeah.
it, which is interesting, and I think there's some ideas. There's also how often.
Every 10 years you're required by the state.
Well,
Yeah, but I know you're talking about
in the
intermediate,
spirit of it being like a living document, we're 18 months
yeah.
into
Okay,
our new comp plan.
yeah,
So if we were to update it every 2 years, I think 6 months before the 2-year mark would be a good time to start
yeah, which is now.
combing through it and start asking commissions to take their first look at it, because it will take 6 months to get meaningful
Yeah.
ideas that need to be implemented and changed.
So as part of our review, should something we try to do, we like to highlight the certain facts that we'll need to refresh every 2 years.
I think it's a matter of each commission kind of understanding what their relative priorities are and their positions. So like the EVC, the Economic Vitality Commission, has a different set of goals than the PCDC, I would hope, right? And so they're probably gonna look at this comp plan through their own lens. And where where the board of trustees asks them to look is kind of the difficult thing. It's like, does someone, the PCDC for the behalf of the BOT or the BOT by themselves, do they come through this and say, okay, here's your 7 goals that you're to review EDC? Or do they say, here's the whole comp plan, you tell us what you want to review, right? There's strengths and weaknesses to both those approaches. So I think that's kind of, we don't have to decide that today, but I think that's kind of the challenge ahead of us, is like how to go about tackling this thing. And we haven't done it before. So the first time we do it, it's going to be awkward and weird and clunky. And it's going to take, a champion to kind of push it through to make it happen. And then maybe the 4th time we do it, it's kind of automatic at that point, right?
Yeah, and I'll note that, I have, here, I'll share my screen real quick. There will be some policies, goals and policies, that, multiple boards and commissions.
Right.
We'll need to look at, like,
Yeah, definitely, there's some Venn diagrams.
so this right here, obviously, this right here, because you're not seeing anything.
I'm always bringing it up. That begs the question of who is best suited for that task. Is that a staff task? Is that something worth spending staff resources on? That's something the board of trustees have to decide, right?
Well, so I mean,
Good deciding which boards should look at which.
Yeah.
I think it's a board decision, since we direct the boards and commissions, unless the board decides that we would like to delegate that.
Right, but I mean, is it a volunteer commission task to come through all these goals and policies and try to decide which commission is best suited, or is that somebody who should be a professional in their field, like a staff person?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the board of trustees would take staff direction and suggestion on that, but it's not any one board of commission's job
Right.
to delegate.
No, I agree with that, but we can't ask staff to do anything, board trustees.
No, I see what you're saying. Yeah, the board will ask, yeah.
as the request is coming, would it make sense to put all of these policies into a spreadsheet and then just simply, at least topically say, this is, an EOC question. This is an ecology board issue. This is both, because like these right here, wildlife habitat, environmentally sensitive areas, we need to look at these through a land use perspective, but also the ecology board needs to look at them through ecological perspective. So there'll certainly be some overlap, but I do see, if we're gonna streamline it, at least in my head, some sort of, whether it's a spreadsheet or not, some sort of delegation framework. So, everybody knows which lane they need to stay in as best they can.
Well, to help the volunteers stay on task too, because
Yeah.
we have a tendency to drift.
I'll also add in the 4th chapter, it does have a lead and partners assigned to different, like the Historic Preservation Commission, and lots of different, even staff is assigned. So yeah, that's all the way in chapter 4. You can kind of see some of the designations for who, at least the plan
But didn't they submit
designated.
their goals that way? Actually, did we ask all the commissions and boards to submit
Yes,
their?
we,
Yeah, so we should have that information about the ones they actually submitted and, yeah.
Let's look at chapter 4.
Thanks for that, Cassie.
Yeah.
Cassie, what page does chapter 4 start on? Do you have the plan open?
It's like I have one, like 135 all the way down there. And what I did is I actually printed out the goals for each guiding principle, and then so the chapter 2 section, and then I printed out the chapter 4 just so I could kind of see them stacked with each other. And the roles and responsibilities are not really exact. Like a lot of them just say staff. Yeah, but then they have partners, and then some of them are not staff led. So that's just maybe a little start. I'm sure we could expand on that.
I mean, I think this document would be really nice if it existed in a matrix form, like for
Yeah.
goals and policies. like the implementation policies.
Mhm.
And for things that do overlap, should commissions come together to discuss them? Or is that just really taxing to have individual sessions and then joint discussions?
I think we hope that there's 95% of this stays intact. Right? And that we're really looking for kind of like, glaring things that need to be updated because they're wrong now, or maybe from time to time, some nuance that exists that might help with policy changes.
Does it help?
Like Prop 123.
You probably, okay, yeah, just to say, can we go back through like the last year of what the planning commission's been working on, like agendas, and be like, okay, we know affordable housing, but Prop 123 has been a major, that probably needs to be a focus of, is there affordable housing area?
I think that would be a good task for us when we are workshopping our portion of the joint event.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, but there's a couple of studies that have happened since then. For instance, like our sidewalk assessment,
Oh, yeah.
it's not referenced. And then the housing study is not referenced either. But the way that the chapter 1's written is it says these things were taken into consideration in the formation of this plan. So we want to update it. We actually have to wordsmith that narrative and say these are the plans that are referenced, henceforward or whatever.
Or, you could add an addendum for every review cycle at the end saying, since this was originally published.
It's a great idea.
these-
Yeah, add paragraphs on that page. But yeah, to answer your question directly, I think what you're describing is like after we kind of figure out how this thing gets updated, then that'll be our task is to say,
Yeah.
okay, what have we been doing the last 2 years?
Yeah, these are the things that have been,
Yeah.
greatest concern, greatest, focus.
But I like, I think the starting with goals is probably the way to do it, right? And kind of ignoring chapter 4 for now. And like basically saying each commission, and by, I mean, board of trustees, maybe one way of doing it is saying each commission, these goals that are listed, are these aligning still with your commission's goals?
Mm.
And that what we've talked about with the board of trustees, do you see any things that need to be updated and how we've written them, anything that's out of date, really just good maintenance? And what's missing? I think that might be the one. What's missing?
Yeah, and knowing that, additions to the comp plan or big changes to the comp plan will require community input.
Right.
You're saying ignore this chapter 4, because this has a bunch of goals listed in it.
Well, I think for now, because are these goals or are these the implementation policies? I always forget.
These are strategies.
Yeah, those are like the most finite detail. So the way I've like tried to use this is when there's something that comes up like a public hearing, I go here first and look to see if what we're talking about is directly addressed here, and it usually isn't because these are really specific. And I think if there's a commission sitting around on their hands without anything to do, this would be a great place for them to spend time, but that never happens. So I actually kind of find this to be sort of useless in some ways. They're really specific, which is great because you can measure them, you can check them off, but they're like not really, they're too specific to be guiding principles, but they're not big enough to be helpful all the time with what we're trying to decide on. So I almost feel like if you go through the goals first, then you trickle that information down into an update of these strategies second. So are the goals aligned first? What are we missing? What are we prioritizing? And then based on that action, what needs to change here? Do some of these need to be stricken? Do some of these need to be updated or rewritten? But chapter 2 and chapter 4 should probably exist together, and they don't, which is kind of frustrating.
Yeah, and then, a question from staff is, where do we gauge, this near-term goal? Assess Lyons Municipal Code to understand barriers to residential and mixed-use development in the downtown area. So when do we say that this is accomplished? Is it a code amendment? Is it us getting the mixed-use districts teased out, the design guidelines, or is it actually when we have investment downtown? What is that benchmark that was in the head? Because I wasn't here drafting this, so a lot of these, you don't know where that finish line is,
I always thought these existed to give us permission to do things.
Okay.
So it's like, okay, we want staff to do something. Oh, look, it says right here in the comp plan that they can do this. Right.
Okay.
So there's no reason why we shouldn't give staff the resources and authority to study this thing. or whatever, but I don't know if we've ever used it that way. I think that was the intention. It was very much like a pre-existing structure that existed with the consultant, and they kind of pushed us through it like a new exterior. So I don't know if it's always gonna make a ton of sense, especially on the strategy side.
I guess what I'm looking for is if, at least on the planning side, if planning staff can go through, check off what we have seemingly accomplished,
Oh, I see.
what's in progress, you know, and then kind of what's coming up and how staff can kind of lead to some sort of terminus. But figuring out what that terminus is important.
It's almost like that third column needs to be not necessarily priority, but it needs to be like priority in progress or.
Yeah, it needs to be like, I think we need a fourth column that's, you know, status.
Status, right?
Like never addressed or not yet addressed in the last 5 years.
Yeah, or, you know, so for example, the example you used, I think it says ED2C, it's a good eye chart.
You can read that.
You know, the action word there is assess, so,
Yeah.
I mean, I think you have assessed the municipal code, so you could go, okay, status is
Is it-
code has been assessed.
But to me, like, I don't know, like, that's hard. I mean, but you're right, the action word there is assess.
And the result would be report, right, from an assessment
Or
or
who
assessment,
assessed it in the date,
No,
you know, like their initials and the date.
but
and
the
then there's-
findings should be the result.
Well, I don't know if that has to, you're right. I don't know if
The
that has to be
findings.
in this plan,
I
because then we're gonna
see.
have like 3,000 pages.
Oh, sure,
But a reference to like the author of who assessed it and
Yeah.
what date they assessed it at. That way, at
Yeah.
least you can track down the information.
And
you
if
need
there
it.
were a way to update the PDF when when we all, you know, do the updates, you know, let's say in 2024, we create a mixed use zoning designation, you know, it would be great to be able to note in the document in 2024, we did this.
and maybe that's at the end, like you said, paragraphs of what's changed since this was initially published,
And then maybe you could redline the things that we've already done.
maybe links to things.
That would be
Yes.
satisfying.
So we could have all of our staff work on only this document for.
Yes, hey,
I know.
This is our guide though, isn't it?
Well,
This is it, this is what we're supposed to do, these should be on our agenda, these
Yeah.
items.
we did one, the last time we did one was like 25 years ago or so. And
Full comprehensive plan.
yeah, it was supposed to be every 10 years, but I think it ended up being like 15 by the time we got it updated.
Well, yeah, oh, cause,
But my
Well,
point is like
okay.
it sat there for a long time and it was referenced from time to time, but it wasn't the guiding document that we could make it. And so I think there's some realism here of like, how much do we want to use this as a strategic kind of document moving forward with new policies versus do we want to hold it and clutch it close to our heart and use it every day? And I don't know how to answer that, but I kind of feel like it's somewhere in between.
They should be dynamic, I think.
And, you know, I think the last comp plan, it was done, I believe, right before the flood.
So it's like,
with
yeah,
us as well, I think.
And so that changed everything, and then we had like the recovery action plan and
Good point.
all.
the LPPA, but that was kind of a
plans.
substitute.
And priorities change,
Yeah,
I would say, I like something that's super urgent.
and now, you know, we're done with flood recovery, so it's a different landscape.
Good point.
Well, you know, just thinking, I would like to see how we've advanced each of these strategies as they fall within the PCDC purview. I would be very interested to learn that since I'm new.
Sure.
What have we done to move these things forward? What haven't we looked at yet?
Right. Yeah. And some of these things were created with minds that are no longer here. So we don't even necessarily, like, some of them are obvious, but some of them, like, it's not clear what they were thinking when they were authored either. So that might be part of our maintenance too.
Yeah.
Is to go through them and say, okay, what was Kemet thinking here?
And
I
we
think it
come
was
in and
actually-
speak to some of this at some point?
I
as
think
like-
Alex was
Alex was doing.
the
one.
lead.
Okay.
Well, and Dave Hamrick was really involved the
Mhm.
whole way
Yeah, yeah.
through this, so I'm sure he'll have some insight too.
Yep, Barney.
So I'm just going through and pulling it in.
But I mean, it's indicative of why we're talking about it in a workshop, is because it's just kind of a beastly task for a volunteer commission.
Sure
This
is.
is our day job, we probably figured out, because we'd have to, we'd have a deadline, we'd have performance reviews. But in lack of that in this commission, I don't know how to do it.
We could, snacks.
Snacks.
Get you guys.
Roll for pizza.
One bag of Cheez-Its, who performs the best.
Yeah.
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 Well, LU1A, we are active, I can say actively working on updating the IGA for Boulder. I mean, so they're, yeah,
So we could attack it from two sides, could say boards and commissions, board of trustees want you to look at your goals,
Mhm.
the goals we have and see if they still align, and then we could say as staff, when you have the time, go through these strategies, we'll talk about them in the BOT or the PCDC or wherever it needs to be talked about. And maybe look at like one.
yeah, and some of
one policy
these,
at a time.
were left somewhat ambiguous, but because they're ambiguous, they're big lifts. So like,
Right,
this one, review line zoning code to ensure a flexible, sustainable land use framework to guide future growth, development patterns and forms.
that could be a $50,000.
So like what does, the implementation of this, and I think their staff can kind of, provide some insight on what we can do. But again, it's where does the community and where's the town, what does this mean, and again, when has this been achieved?
Since we have the luxury of staff planner on our commission, and we're also, I think, the planning commission is kind of primarily tasked with shepherding the comp plan, whether or not we don't delegate, but we shepherd it, right?
Mhm.
We could make this an ongoing part of our meetings, like every workshop, we go through one goal, 6 things.
Yeah.
And it might just be Andrew talking about it and us remembering what we've done or haven't done. And maybe we suggest a change here and there, but generally speaking, we're just reminding ourselves that they exist. That could be one way of systematic going through it. I don't know if that's a good idea.
Yeah, that was my goal, was to go through each of these and have staff notes on what has been accomplished that kind of fits under these, fits in these buckets. And then kind of having a discussion on what you all think still needs to happen, or since most of you were, engaged in this process, is there something that staff, because Cassidy and I, of course, weren't here during that process, and and I have started trying to comb through the files, but we just don't have a lot of, kind of background chatter or noise, in the file to try to glean some, because those conversations are what's important.
Might be a strength that you haven't had the background of making this.
Maybe.
Now we find out how useful the document is, right?
Andrew, can I ask you a question?
Mhm.
So, do you have, there's staff on every single one of these things, and that's a lot of work. If staff are trying to work on all of this, have you been charged with a list of priorities, like work on LU1 and LU2? These are your priorities, and there's the top 5.
Yeah, no, and keep in mind that staff isn't just planning staff.
Right.
Staff can be any staff member that is engaged. It would be my assumption that whoever the lead staff is the liaison to whatever partner board or commission that is below. I think the planner probably fits the role if it's ambiguous and it's not defined. But on the economic side, that probably wouldn't be, I don't know. I don't know how, but that's not part of I haven't received that work charge from Victoria. if
Got
that's
it.
what
I guess
you're
that's my
asking.
question more generally, like, does town staff have like a list of priorities, like top 5 things? that
We
town
have-
Staff will be working.
We have current planning, which takes up,
Yeah.
most of our time, and then we've got,
2
right.
hours a week for these other ancillary things, right? How much time do you have to dedicate to anything else, I guess,
Like
is
2
the
minutes a
question.
Yeah.
So,
So that's why I had originally, and if it's every meeting, that's fine. I had originally, said maybe once a month we go through these.
Well, we could do once a month and go through a lot of them.
Yeah.
Or once every 2 weeks and go through a few of them.
And then, I can prioritize current planning, as best I can, so we have time to workshop through these. But current planning, it's current, so it's hard to say, you just never know.
Right. So do we think doing this every 2 to 3 years is enough to kind of keep us somewhat current.
If it were me, I think the best, and I don't wanna do this, but I think having. Doing it once a month, maybe, or maybe it's once a quarter, just really digging into it and going through it in a long meeting that is scheduled for just that meeting, and perhaps that's when, other boards and commissions come to that meeting that need to be engaged in that process, but I also think that each board, where there is, where we have multiple boards, I think them operating within their silo first to get that board's kind of interpretation separately, and then bringing those ideas together. I worry if we have, a meeting where we don't discuss these goals through a land use perspective, and then we jump into straight having a joint meeting with another board of commission, that there might be some, I don't know if it's groupthink or whatever you want to talk about or say it is, but we need to be looking at, the PCDC needs to be looking at these through a land use perspective. What you all, is directly on your plate in the decisions you make. That's just my opinion. It can completely go out the window.
So from hearing this so far, is the idea, the concept sort of that we would each have our assignments of what to review, and every quarter provide comments to each item that we could then discuss within our group, that others could see and we could discuss together. So like we have to prepare something, some comments or some sort of report to share and to discuss. If we just meet and talk every quarter, we don't have a follow-up meeting after that.
No,
It's like
it's good
changes
though.
don't get captured, and so,
Quarter seems like a reasonable amount of time. It's quite a bit. Only meeting twice a month, so 6 meetings a quarter, right?
And that's you all. Some boards only meet
Once
once.
a month, so there's 3 or 4 meetings a quarter, so might be too often, really. So it's like kind of backing ourselves into this corner where it really looks like it's like just some ongoing slow drip maintenance of this comp plan, which may not be a bad way of doing it either. But I don't know. It's a big commitment. It's like, what do we want this document to be? It kind of goes back to that every time. Do we want this to be an every 6 months slow drip committed process of updating this thing continuously over 10 years?
Will make our task easier down the road by doing it. If you're, by not updating it, does it just?
Well, yeah, when 10 years comes up, we'll have an easier job coming up with a new one, because we'll be so familiar with it. But
And I think just having it open and actively working on it makes your all's decisions easier
I agree.
when we have current planning issues. So even if we're not making, leaps and bounds steps, everyone being familiar with it, checking the boxes where we can. But, being able, in the case of Riverbend, being able to say, oh, there are multiple goals, that this meets or doesn't meet. And staff, myself, need to do a much better job of kind of being very directive of kind of, this is where the comp plan.
you'd hope that the applicant would do half the work for you.
Yeah.
Find
We
all
can't
things
lean
that
on them.
are supportive of their argument.
Which actually makes sense. If they do mention the specific goals on the different public hearings,
They're always in support of their own application, of course.
yeah,
Yeah.
okay. So right there, we can pull those out. I know it's always hard to talk about, but there's, you always put out goals that are supportive and.
So it sounds like what we could do is have, under the Board of Trustees direction, each board and commission could review the goals that have strategies assigned to them as partners.
Mhm.
So in here, I'm looking at, what's SFC?
Sustainable futures.
Thank you. Sustainable Futures Commission. The Board of Trustees asked them, would you review any, whatever that is, I can't read it because the green thing's up top.
Dark sky protection, green lines.
Yeah, but not even just any 2H, but the goal of any, would you please review that to see if the goal that's listed here in the comp plan aligns with what your goals are this year or upcoming for your commission? And then whether or not SFC comes back and says, we would like these updates, is kind of up to them.
Mm.
So at least there's some like there's a little bit of like compelling, but not watchdogging, not like making sure like policing somebody for doing the work that they maybe don't want to do. And then we as a commission, planning commission, can decide if we want to see updates to the comp plan that align to the things that we're seeing and we're interested in as our commission, just like the EBC could do the same for them.
Mhm.
And then we have to find what forum that exists in. Is that a joint PCDC Board of Trustees meeting? That sounds like a really boring meeting. Is that maybe it's just in written form and it's an email to the chair or whatever, and it gets kicked to the Board of Trustees as a recommendation to update the comp plan or something.
So in terms of like the goal, like goal NE3, right here, the roles and responsibility column shows different parties. So who's reviewing the goal? Is it the lead for one strategy within the goal, or is it any responsible party in that column under goal NE3 together says, is this still our goal? And if we all say yes, then we review the strategies in accordance with the lead and then the partners in that order.
Yep. Basically saying review the goal, because
As
there's a
a
little
joint.
yeah.
Yeah.
There's a little description further back in chapter 2 about what the goal means.
Yeah.
It's a little confusing because there's like chunks of stuff about it, and then there's strategies that sort of align with those chunks. But yeah, you're basically saying, EAB, would you please review goal NE3? And then after you've done that, under your staff's direction, your staff liaison's direction, review the strategies, NE3A, NE3B, NE3C.
Say, I don't know how specific some of these things are, because the streetlight policy, we have the new Summit Housing Development right across the street from me, and they have really high, the streetlights they put out there are the same as the streetlights they use in town. They can shine really bright at night, and they just started turning them off at night.
Sounds like you should join the EAB.
I know, that's what I'm saying,
But-
yeah, it's interesting, but that's a good example of how a policy that works well for being in town when it's a major travel corridor might not be what should be used, because we're not allowed density out there. I think that's what drove. I was trying to explain to my husband, I was like, I think they were just following what was the development standard out there. But the thing is I'm not sure that's still appropriate if we're thinking about doing more, maybe some higher density in areas or things.
Well, that would be something that
Yeah, exactly.
whoever's reviewing that goal and that strategy might have that kind of an update suggestion.
Yeah, exactly, yeah, and,
We hope there aren't, 500 updates, suggestions.
yeah, exactly, yeah,
But I mean,
There might be.
Might be.
yeah.
Maybe we ask each commission to prioritize the top 10 wish list or top 5 wish list or something.
Well, and I think, we're gonna need to be careful about making sure that any real substantive changes to goals, it has to go back out for review,
What that looks like.
for public input.
yeah, I guess that is a concern. Again, we're only 18 months in. So,
We could kick it to January. and
no,
say-
but why would there be major changes to goals? What is?
It's really, well, it's two-part. It's one, having each commission look at the goals so they're aware of what our goals are.
Sure.
So that they're fresh, so we're sort of helping them maintain themselves. But really, they're looking at the strategies with their staff member to see if
Okay.
the strategies are still relevant, or maybe more importantly, looking at the goal first, then the strategies, what's missing.
Yeah.
I think that might be what's,
Yeah, and what we've done, like what's been accomplished, I think it's important to look
Yeah.
at that too.
I really wanna see that. When I see this and it says like any 2H develop a plan to address extreme heat events, okay, so where's the plan? Can I
Yeah.
read it?
So
Where
that-
does it sit?
Cassidy and I will be working on going through at least the planning directives and seeing what has been done since this was, adopted, what we're working on. So, right now, we're drafting a dark sky, ordinance, right now. So I can put that will be done by the end of the week. It won't, of course, be in front of you all, but we're trying to go down these lists and start to address these issues. I can only talk in front of the BOT for so long, and as the mayor can attest, sometimes I'm there for quite a long time. So I'm trying to slow that roll down a bit,
you're good at talking.
but
Practice.
if we can, if we had some priorities, dark sky really important. The only reason why we're working on it is it came up pretty heavy in Riverbend, and, it is a strategy.
Are you working with the SFC or the EAB on that, or?
I know Aaron is for the streetlight
Aaron is?
policies,
Okay,
yeah,
right.
and then we're gonna we're gonna merge these things together at some
Well,
point.
and
Kind of
then,
a quick nuts and bolts question, if you don't mind. Do we have access to the origin documents for this, or where we could add a column? Like, is there a Word doc, or is this?
It's-
spreadsheet somewhere.
It has to live somewhere. I can certainly.
We don't have to pay Glenn Houston like $1,000 every time we update something.
Yeah.
Or
I don't know what it was.
Clarion.
I don't know if it was natively created in,
Pretty sure it's Word.
Is it? It's
I don't
not
know.
You
in
should,
design?
yeah,
It's
yeah,
a
do
table.
it, we have, yeah, it's not just a PDF, we have the actual.
That's what we're
Spreadsheet,
just,
yeah.
that's what
Yeah,
we're
that's it,
talking
yeah.
about. Do you all have InDesign here? Does Kim Mitchell?
I mean, we can,
I
if,
do.
if need be, we can.
He's got his gown.
I mean, I've got it.
Yeah, that's, we
You
can
know.
just, the mayor and the chair of the PCDC can
There
do
you
it.
go.
Yeah.
And just-
Snacks, I think was what we require.
Snacks. Yeah, snacks.
But I will say what's interesting about like, say like the dark sky now,
Well, hold on, before we
Yeah, yeah,
move into that, I
yeah.
think it's important to establish what can we change, and if, what should a change look like is probably the missing third thing, is like.
Yeah.
How do we go about updating this? How often do we update it? And like, do we have the means to update it in the way we want to update it? Because that might actually tell us a lot about how we're gonna update it. If it's just an addendum page at the end, that's not quite as satisfying. It might cause us to look at this whole thing differently. So maybe that's something you guys could find out about next time, before the next time we talk about it, is do we have access to the origin documents from Clarion?
This was paid for by NOLA.
Mostly.
partly, yeah, mostly.
I could hook us up with some, contract employee students from the University of Colorado who could open this up in Adobe and edit it if we don't have the software.
No, I think we can probably get InDesign, at least,
It's kind of
you know,
expensive.
it is.
Well, I think Clarion would send us the native files.
Yeah.
If we asked for them. I don't see why.
It has to have a Victoria sheet, right?
Yeah, and I'll dig through the
I don't know if it was
files.
a deliverable, yeah, it might have been a deliverable to have the original.
But it sounds like perhaps that we just need a fourth column about progress. Or
Yeah.
something.
There's enough room there. It could just be like a one letter progress bar, like
Check.
C is complete, kind of like C is complete,
Yeah.
O is ongoing, or I don't know,
Yeah.
something we could come up with,
Yeah, and if not, it truly,
color code them.
it'd be a headache, but it wouldn't be hard to put all these into a spreadsheet.
Yeah, you could, as an addendum, just like here's
You
the
know,
progress.
and then we have our progress check sheet and, maybe that's an easier deliverable. I don't know.
On construction documents for big buildings, they do update sets in different color paper, just slide the new sheet in behind the original sheet. So you end up with a document that has like 3 versions of the same sheet in different color backgrounds
New dates.
for what's up to date, yeah.
Yeah.
It's not a terrible idea, it's kind of a dumb machine, but it could work.
Well, and this had to have been created originally in some sort of spreadsheet.
Yeah, I would imagine it was merged from a spreadsheet,
That's
so.
why I'm like,
I would
that's
I would
gotta
make this on a
exist.
table in Word if I were doing it. I wouldn't open InDesign to do this.
And I would do it in Excel, so.
If it's in Excel, you could redline any changes, right? Like in case we accidentally made a mistake and changed too much, like what was the original? And we could just do like a comparison.
Yeah, we'll still have the
Track
original
changes.
document.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I would never overstate the original, so, but, yeah, we could certainly track changes and do all that, make
On
sure.
Excel or Word or maybe InDesign, I've never used it.
So what do we do now? I guess question, Holly, is do you think the Board of Trustees has an appetite to update this with all the boards and commissions?
I do think, yeah,
Or we should wait for them to,
it's a busy next month or so. Really shows no sign of slowing. So let me
What
get
happened?
let me get with Victoria, but I do think the Board of Trustees should discuss how we want to go about this.
I'm happy to kind of like synthesize what we've talked about into something of a draft directive and then send it to you and Andrew for,
Sure, I mean, if you want to send it in the form of a memo with your suggestions about how to move forward, that would be easy to pop into the packet and
Just something to
make
talk
it a
about.
quick discussion, yeah,
Yeah.
that would be helpful.
And then I'll do a cover memo and. And it's just discussion direction?
Yeah,
So I'll just give you a native Word doc, that's okay. Okay. And I can just say it's like kind of a synthesized meeting minutes from our workshop on this, and then, you know, just a memo of what we kind of thought might be a good starting point for the board of trustees to discuss.
that's very helpful. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, and I don't want it to seem like I don't have much direction for how to move forward, but the way that the document's written is, I think there's a lot of different ways we could pursue this, and it's how to best streamline it with your all's time, staff's time, to where it's effective, you know.
I mean, this thing could, starting on this endeavor could be just like a complete miss. It could just be an arrow that flies over everyone's head, no one does anything. Or on the opposite, it could be something that bogs everyone down into weeks and weeks of meetings.
Yeah.
So it really is, it's delicate. It has to be somewhere in the middle, the way it's pitched and delivered to the commissions and staff, to make sure that there's not too much time spent on it, but enough that we feel like we're doing right by it. And it still has to be the wish of the board of trustees.
And you know, Andrew, what else we might think about doing is reaching out to Clarion and asking them if they have any guidance in terms of updating. You know, what have they seen other communities do successfully or not so successfully?
Actually, I think I have a meeting. And I think I can't remember her name, Rebecca, I think, but I'll be co-presenting with one of the planners at Clarion, so maybe we can move forward like that, so.
Yeah.
What meeting? What meeting?
Sorry,
What meeting? Oh,
the Western Planner.
that's
Conference
right,
is
okay.
coming up,
Yeah.
so I have to give a few different sessions that I'm not prepared for, but. So come to Cheyenne, you know, mid-August if you want to hear me talk more, so.
Super appealing, man.
Poor Andrew.
If I was an attorney and got paid by the word, I'd be a wealthy person.
You're not the only one.
Oh.
We could certainly spend more time on this, but it's been about an hour, and I think for
Yeah.
purposes, I feel like we're at a good spot, but do you guys have any floating?
No, I just, well, like, that's interesting you brought up that streetlight thing, is that, maybe that's just because I didn't make the effort. Well, I remember I brought it up to Andrew Alex before he left, but, you know, I think I have an interesting perspective on the streetlight thing, because something that I don't think anyone else has seen or heard, but I guess, I mean, but Riverbrand brought up another perspective too, that might be, anyways, but I guess it's a part of making it public, and that's how these things get addressed, but,
Well,
yeah.
the other thing that's probably not addressed, and we probably won't address it today, is what are we satisfied with as a public input process? Is it, you know, on the laziest end of the spectrum, we could say these are all public meetings and our agendas are posted, so therefore it's a public process, but that's probably not the smartest way to go about it based on past data points. So, you know, what do we do, and what are our possibilities for being able to make public changes to the comp plan? I think we have months before we have to worry about that. Door knockers, or those stupid things.
They work, they're very
It
effective.
did work.
Oh,
We all took turns delivering. PCDC went out and canvassed the neighborhoods.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
no, I did it, I did it. It sounds scary, I know, you go and talk to people, I mean, you get out there, I mean,
So, never mind, this goes way too far in the weeds. I'm just still trying to understand some of these directives, but this one is not really planning focused, so I won't waste your all's time. Some of them I have a hard time really understanding. Okay, well, I'll just talk about it. So develop training programs for town staff on water efficiency best practices, including irrigation. What is the end game? That staff knows how to best use water, or that we go out and then we spread that gospel to the community? Like what is that?
I mean, I know who this originated from, and
And I'm not talking bad about it. It's just,
No.
there are a lot of directives like this in the comp plan. From an outsider, I'm like,
well, they're not directives, they're
or
strategies.
sorry, strategies. But what is the end game here? And what is staff supposed to do with this?
Maybe the UEB or the SFC might have some guidance about what that might mean to them, the
Okay.
town. But I agree with you. I think maybe one of the goals here is to strike some of these strategies down so that we have a simpler version of implementation strategies. But I don't know if that's fair. I don't know the comp plan well enough to say that we need to do that.
Yeah, or it might be just the UEB, or I guess there's not a partner for that one, but whoever we see best fit. Just clarifying or teasing this strategy out a bit. To what are town staff, once we know all of these best practices, what are we supposed to do with that? Or is it just so we're better prepared to look at, you know, BMPs for current planning or something like that? But
I see your point. It seems like if the goal is to implement sustainable solutions, planning solutions, LU4.
mhm,
One strategy is to develop training programs, but the end goal is really just to ensure staff understands
Yeah.
best practices. So maybe there's another way to do it without developing the training programs. But yeah. Okay.
Or you can attend the water conference.
Take a water test, make sure you understand. I don't know.
I have enough external engagements at this point, so.
Yeah.
All right,
I think we're good to
thank
wrap up
you
the
all.
workshop.
I'll at least, in the meantime, if you'll draft that to the BOT, I'll have a cover letter. I will discuss it very lightly, to get direction. And then I will try to track down the original workable document
When do you need a memo by to be part of the packet?
Thursday.
Thursday, okay. That's good.
Thursday noon.
Thursday noon. I hear end of day when I hear Thursday.
That's why I said
I
noon.
appreciate it. It's a
Yeah.
Wednesday.
Thursday, end of lunch.
Wednesday at 10 p.m.
There you go. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. All right, thanks.
All right, thank you all.
everybody.
Thanks.
Wow, stay like-
Daylight.
Ah.